Surrealism or the bullet. This is a post that I posted on Facebook. If Facebook has any relative importance, it's pretty redundant these days, except for the fact that the information is still being posted and still being utilized. Redundant in the fact that the politics that are currently controlling the media and controlling a certain amount of thought and action is being left redundant by the fact that it doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't mean anything because they've taken away the meaning and the rationality from it. So they say it doesn't mean anything, but it does mean something. And it will continue to mean something even though they're using their faculties to try to do the opposite. Surrealism or the bullet. André Breton, artist and author of the Surrealist Manifesto, once said that the simplest act of surrealist art would be to go out into the street with a revolver and start shooting indiscriminately into the crowd. Despite violent crime as a whole being down when this was written, incidents of young men walking into the street and opening fire seems to be more and more common. The causes of these incidents are legion and are regularly touted or ignored by the media. Being that this is happening on a fairly regular basis now, the U.S. Navy Yard, Sandy Hook, Aurora, and Tucson, to name a few. There's been many more since then. Many more. The surrealist concept of art expressed in this horrifying prophetic phase might be worth examining. That is, of course, not to imply that a painting by, say, Salvador Dali or a poem by Rimbaud is directly responsible in any way for these incidents of mass murder. I'm going to stop right there and say very quickly that any young person who's reading Wikipedia and comes across this entry, what would they think about that comment? Would it actually really affect the way that they think? If they were 6 years old and if they knew anything about Dali, they would say, no, it doesn't affect what's happened. If they would read Rimbaud, they would say, no, it doesn't affect what happened. In France, if they read Rimbaud, what they say, will this happen? Are they going to shoot somebody because they're gay? Are they going to shoot someone because their rights are going to be taken away from them? Are they going to shoot someone for some other injustice while they're reading Rimbaud? Well, I would say the most intelligent person would not. In Spain, the most intelligent person would not commit an act of violence because they looked at Dali's paintings or because of his history, what he was like in real life, his family, etc., what he was born into, etc. They would not commit an act of violence. But the Surrealist movement, what it stood for and what it was born of and what it influenced may shed some light on the current state of our social dilemma of young men taking to the streets, guns in hand. Dreamlike in its execution, it's a surreal moment. Watching the video of Aaron Alexis stalking through the offices of the Naval Sea System Command. Even more sinister and devastating is the image of jetliners smashing into the World Trade Center on a bright blue Tuesday morning. I was alive and working on 9/11, and I was going to get a cup of coffee. There was a huge window where we could see all the skyscrapers of Manhattan. We were directly across from the World Trade, and the only thing I missed was watching the plane go into the World Trade. I didn't see that. I just watched on television. I saw everything else happen though in real time. And the last thing that came to my mind was André Breton, which I've read Communicating Vessels, and Rimbaud. I've read Season in Hell and some of his other writings. I did not think of surrealism, and I didn't think of the writers. I thought, wow, a plane went into the World Trade? but not as a surrealist act, as a mechanistic act, a phenomena, yeah. And that's how it was played out in the media. How could a building fall down? It was meant to take, all this stuff like that, but it went down anyway, right? And all the people died anyway, right? It actually withstood, uh, explosion. Anyway, so Albert Camus offered a blistering critique of surrealism. The essential thing is that every obstacle should be denied and that the irrational should be triumphant. However, let me add, the people jumping to their death was very surreal. Watching them, how fast they would fall, watching whatever emotions they displayed, holding hands, sliding down the side of the building. That was pretty surreal. And then hearing the thump on the floor. So, what in fact does this apology for murder signify, if not that, in a world without meaning and without honor, only the desire for existence in all its forms is legitimate? Everything that stands in the way of desire, principally society, must therefore be mercilessly destroyed. If the world is without meaning, without the grounding of rational thought and a belief in truth that transcends our subjective definitions, then there's no boundary to inflicting our wildest whims and desires on society because we, gods unto ourselves, have so determined that this is what must be done to satisfy those desires. Likewise, the mass shooter transcends all laws, values, and norms of conduct and fires indiscriminately in places where violence is so unexpected as to appear almost dreamlike in its execution. Well, remember, the school is a very violent place. The education that's being taught is violent, most of it. And then math, for instance, is considered abstract. So whether you're studying history, that's violent. If you're studying language, it's violent, etc. That's a fact, unfortunately. And science is somewhat of an abstraction until the principal laws are proven, until empiricist uh, law is proven in science, in a formula, etc. It is a surreal moment watching the video of Aaron Alexis stalking through the offices uh, of the Naval Sea System Command, as he said before. And even more sinister and devastating is the image of jetliner smashing into the World Trade, again on a bright blue Tuesday morning. It is the brutal invasion of our rational, mundane world by the irrational and the insane. Well, that's not completely true because the world is pretty irrational and pretty insane, except we operate and live with a certain amount of order. And we believe everything is in order because we're trying to keep everything supposedly in order when in fact much of it is insane and irrational at the same time. We just tell ourselves that it's not irrational, and then we tell ourselves that it's not insane so we can get through our day, so we can work, etc. However, these are taken to sometimes illogical proportions, as our government is doing right now, and many other things that are associated with what we call law and order. By what does this irrationality have to do with today? For starters, the Surrealist movement was a great influence on what became known as postmodern philosophy, a philosophy which denies any transcendent notions of truth, justice, etc., and is currently in vogue at your local university and has been for quite some time now. Now, the comment on postmodern philosophy, remember, has to be reckoned with the fact that as we understood gravity, motion, and then applied it as such, are we any further from understanding gravity and motion now? Uh, that is a subject that has been well tackled by Alan Bloom, Roger Kimball, and numerous others. Possibly more important, however, is a collision between the irrational and the rational. Take, for instance, a segment of shooters that have been American born but clearly mentally ill at the time of the shooting. Adam Lanza of Newtown, Connecticut, Jarrett Lee Lawfer of Tucson, Arizona, James Holmes of Aurora, Colorado shooting, and Seeing Hung Chul of Virginia Tech. They were all gay and somewhat misfits in their homosexuality. All of these individuals showed sure signs of delusional psychosis, schizophrenia, and other possible mental disorders, which went undiagnosed or were diagnosed. The world of a schizophrenic or delusional psychotic is one in which irrationality reigns. Disambiguated voices, strange visions, paranoia, and a breakdown of reality. Like the British film, the Italian British film that's out right now, where the person is here in New York and they can't remember the virus. You know that with the third eye, that you must look to see. None of that is true. It's a lie. Take this passage from the true memoir, autobiography of a schizophrenic girl. Suddenly, as I was passing the school, I heard a German song. The children were having a singing lesson. I stopped to listen, and at that instant, a strange feeling came over me. A feeling hard to analyze, but akin to something I was to know too well later. A disturbing sense of unreality. It seemed to me that I no longer recognized the school. It had become as large as a barracks. The singing children were prisoners, compelled to sing. It was as though the school and the children's song were set apart from the world. So, this article, a bit of the article that I posted here, I will say that has some bearing on what actually happened, but mostly has a bearing on what didn't happen, what's not being said, that has happened socially and politically. So I would say whoever entered this particular Wikipedia article, they need to do more work because it's not it's not an act of plagiary, but it just simply doesn't tell the truth. Um, Using surrealism and then using what has happened, it wasn't written very well. It should be written a lot clearer. I could write it very extremely clearly if I wanted to, but I won't because I have other things that I have to do. So that's it.
This struggle, whatever the fight for the human mind or for the soul, is going to continue. It took initially you had these various players back in the 50s. The MK Ultra project, for instance, which was a major mind control project, was involved, and but I think everything's out in the open. You just got to keep your eyes open, and you'll see what they're doing. In fact, there were some reports that came out that from Sweden that the government was using psyops to stop quote unquote disinformation, but they're still using psyops. So they're admitting they're using psychological operations on the population to stop them from listening to with certain recordings or certain podcasts or Facebook and so on. So it's out there in the open. Some changes in today's news that suggest something is going to be happening in the next few months. But we're still in the midst of the battle here. And the battle's for the control of the human mind. So the one takeaway I ask everyone is to really think for yourself, number one. And no one has a monopoly on the information. No one. There's just too many pieces of data. Some might feel the information supports one narrative versus another, but no one has it. Understand that these guys, these talking heads, whether it be Fauci or Walensky or they're just talking heads. Many of them are bureaucrats. They're not really the real scientists. You want to talk to real scientists. doctors and lawyers, and we have scientists, doctors, epidemiologists, virologists, and so on, and see what they have to say. I mean, and sometimes you'll get some information that's not usually available to the public. But that's the key thing. To really understand that there is a battle for your attention, for your mind, for your soul. So yes is no, no is yes, and they're in a state of paralysis. So we have been fed information. Perhaps the information was just evolving over time, but at least they could have said that. But instead, they just gave it with the certainty of fact, when in fact there is. We even today the information keeps changing. So we need to understand that what we see through the media is filtered through the lenses of the special interest groups that are promoting that. It's well known that Pfizer supports Anderson Cooper, and a big percentage of the revenue that a lot of companies receive, especially mainstream, they come from big pharma. In fact, the U.S. and Australia are the only two countries where pharmaceutical companies can advertise. So, this creates a sense of an opportunity. So let's understand very clearly that there are money interests here, and keeping the narrative going. Transformation psychosis is essentially we have an aggregation of communication systems that are essentially vying for each other for control. So you had the mainstream media, which seems to be delivering almost the same identical message, partially as a result of the trusted news initiative, but also a sense that they're almost repeating exactly the same words. So that begs the question: who is the handler here? Who's telling them the truth?